High Vibe Nation is live. Welcome to the High Vibe Nation, where we have set out to raise the vibration of every human being on the planet. Your hosts on this journey are Gideons and Pamela Aubrey. So let's join them now in their current interview with a high-vibing individual.
Hello and welcome to the High Vibe Nation, the #1 positive media show focused on raising the vibe of the planet. A space for you to remember the power within you. It's a love revolution. I'm your host, Sherry Gideons, and this is my co-host, Pamela Aubrey.
Welcome, everyone. It's always such a joy to be with you, and such a joy to have our special guest today, Mitzi Perdue. Mitzi is the daughter of one family business titan. Her father founded the Sheraton hotel chain, and the widow of another. Her late husband was family business poultry magnate Frank Perdue, and she is also a businesswoman in her own right. She started the family wine grape business, now one of the larger suppliers of wine grapes in California. Her family of origin that started the Sheraton hotels began with the family business, Henderson Estate Company, in 1840. And her Perdue family started in 1920 in the poultry business. These two families have a combined tradition of 280 years of staying together as a family. Mitzi is happy to share actionable advice on how they created and maintained their family businesses. Welcome to the show, Mitzi.
Well, I'm actually enchanted to be here, and I'll give you all the good vibes I can.
Yay.
Wonderful.
Welcome.
So wonderful to have you here. And as you know, on this show, we like to talk about being high vibe. So tell us what it means to you to be high vibe.
What it means to me, almost the most important thing for me is energy. Mm-hmm. Because if you've got energy, you can do everything else. To me, it's just incredibly important to have physical fitness, to have the right attitudes, to eat right. I'm totally into self-help books. So I love the idea of being inspirational, which you guys certainly are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And we want you to start us out with a little bit of information to share with our audience. And we hear that, you are the daughter of the Sheraton Hotel co-founder and the wife of the chicken company, Frank Perdue. Tell us a little bit what that was like growing up from such a titan of great information around business and motivation.
Well, I was always fascinated as a child by how my father did it, because it was so clear to me, even as a little girl, that this guy was really successful. Like when we'd travel, and in the end, he had 400 hotels. Would always stay in the presidential suites. So, it was not invisible that I had a mega successful father. So I used to ask him over and over again, how did you do it? And he'd give different answers. But I remember one of them, which impressed me no end, was he told me that the success of his hotel business at every level was the people who worked with him. By the way, he didn't say worked for him, worked with him. And he said, well, so, of course, I'm asking him if it's the people who work for you, what do you do to get them to, kind of outperform everybody else? And he told me kind of a secret, but I'll certainly share it with everybody here. He said when he took over a hotel, and the hotel company began in the 1930s at the height of the Great Depression, he told me that the day that he took possession, he'd invite all the workers in the hotel to come into the hotel ballroom. And there might be 400 of them. I mean, hotels have a lot more workers than you really expect. And he said he knew, going into that ballroom, he knew that pretty much every one of those, say, 400 employees was scared that they were going to lose their job. Because it would be absolutely typical for a new owner to get rid of the dead wood, or maybe find jobs for his cousins and uncles and nephews. So the people going in, he knew, were worried, are they going to keep their job? And on top of that, if they lost their job during the height of the Great Depression, the unemployment rate then was 25%. And if you lost a job, you probably weren't going to get it again. So There's my father standing on the stage of the ballroom, looking out over 400 really demoralized people. And the first words out of his mouth were, I'd like every one of you to keep your job. And the reason why is, I believe in you. I know that you know your job better than anybody else in the world. And my job is to give you the resources and the encouragement to show the world just how great you are. And you're going to see in a couple of months, this is going to be the most popular hotel in the city. It's going to be the best served. It's going to be the most financially stable. It's going to be an example to the whole city that tough as things are, things can turn around. Well, can you imagine what it must have meant to the employees from being just as low as you could possibly be to have the new owner tell them, I believe in you. But he told me that words weren't enough. I mean, words count, but that wasn't where he wanted to leave it. He said the next day, the employees would get to witness a whole, cavalcades of like plumbers or electricians or decorators, and they'd all be coming into the hotel to spruce it up. But Father told me, those plumbers, decorators, all the people who were sprucing up the hotel, they didn't even set foot in the public areas, the places where the paying public would see. No, they would go to the employee dining room, the employee lockers, the employee showers, the rickety old elevators, the corridors, and they'd spruce. The first money Father ever spent on a new hotel was in the places that only the employees would see. So of course I asked him, why did you do that? And he said, because I wanted to demonstrate to the employees how important they were, because, and this is kind of like a lesson that I grew up with, people have, and these are his words, people have a compulsion to live up to or down to your expectations. And this was a way of saying, I really meant it when I said, I believe in you. Cool?
Cool. I love that.
So powerful.
And then there's a little bit more to the story, except I'm embarrassed because I'm afraid I'm monologuing too much.
Not at all.
Oh, not at all.
Promise? Because
Yeah,
I think it's bad manners just to monologue, but I do want to share the story.
please do.
Yes.
Okay, so, as a little girl, I'm curious how Daddy did it. So, I'd ask him more, and I'd say, why did you, when you're standing up there in front of everybody, why did you tell them that their job was secure? Why not make them earn it? And he said, in his world, there were 3 ways of getting people to do what you want. And 2 of them, he said, were terrible, and 1 was great. And the first terrible one was, he said, I could have stood up there in front of all of them and told them, shape up or you're fired. And they probably would have done some shaping up. But Father said they'd do it grudgingly. They, their heart wouldn't be in it. They'd do just the minimum that they had to do to get by. And you don't want grudging cooperation. So he said the next approach that could have worked was bribery. He said, I could have stood up there and said, do a great job and there's a raise in it for you. Do a great job, there's a bonus in it for you. But he said, that's better than intimidation, but it's really not good because it's too transactional. People are going to work for the bribe rather than for something bigger. So if bribery and intimidation aren't good, what's left? And in his world, there was one great big thing left, and that was inspiration. The people who were working with him were working to build the best hotel in the city. They were working to be an inspiration to everybody else that things could turn around. And that meant, and these are pretty much his words, that meant that like the maid who's like making beds, or the waitress who's waiting table, or maybe the bartender who's tending bar, they weren't doing those things. No, they were part of a team building the best hotel in the city. And that means that they were, it wasn't just a job, it was something bigger. And another kind of I don't know, point of wisdom from my father was, this is what leadership is in his world. A leader's job is to give people a better vision of themselves. So again, cool?
Cool.
Cool. Love that. And it actually kind of brings to mind, I mean, I know there's a lot of businesses that have been struggling over the last few months. And I just am curious, you know, how do you think this translates for them going through what has happened with the economy and so many people being forced to consider closing their doors or closing their doors?
Well, for one thing, he was a great big optimist, but his idea that intimidation and bribery don't work, but inspiration does work. Inspire, don't require. I think that works particularly at a time that's as difficult as this is. You want the people to feel encouraged and to go the extra mile and to be part of a team, and anything that you can do to communicate to them, you know, that everything depends on them. And by the way, Father started with no employees. He employed 20,000 people at the time of his death. Frank Perdue had exactly the same story. Started with no employees, employed 20,000 people at the time of his death. And by the way, they were in separate industries, but they both did it. And they both, you know, if they were alive today and you could ask them, I know what that answer, if you said, how did you do it? Both of them would say, it's the employees at every level. And then again, the great big question is, well, how do you get the employees to be so committed to it that they'll go the extra mile? And I think it has everything to do with how you treat them. Yeah. And you know, my own phrase is loyalty is a two-way street. You're loyal to them, you believe in them, you care about them. And can I share, since I've told a story about my late father, I kind of want to be fair and tell about my late husband too.
Sure.
And again, I'm worried about monologuing, but you've given me permission, so here goes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, well, when Frank and I first married, and we're talking 1988, we've gotten married rather quickly. I mean, like we knew each other in person 6 weeks and 3 days when we married. Oop. But it was total happiness the whole time for me. But when we just got back from our honeymoon, I gave him a great big shock, and it was the following. It was a very romantic place. It was on a beach in Watch Hill, Rhode Island, kind of late summer, and there weren't many people there. And you know, we're carrying our sandals and just a romantic moment. And suddenly I look up at him and I say, Frank, I think we should entertain every single person who works for the company in our home. And you know, that was a shock to his system because, well, his answer was, at that time, we employed 16,000 people. So he said, that would mean 16,000 people. That's way too many. And I said, and let's invite them 100 at a time. And he said, no, that's, you know, again, that's just not reasonable. And I pretended that I didn't entirely understand that he was saying no. And I told him, I bet we could put it together in 6 weeks. No, that's way too soon. And I said, I think we should start with the secretaries or the administrative assistants because they can tell people that our parties are fun and not scary. And we went sort of round and round with my pretending that I wasn't processing that my dear husband was saying no. But as we continued talking about it, I noticed that his, you know, no was sort of changing to, man, maybe there's something to it. Mm-hmm. Until finally he said, I like it. And I know, and this gets back to employees being made to feel important. Frank Perdue, his whole business career, as far as I could tell, was kind of focused on making the people he worked with feel important. And although he didn't like the idea of, as a basically shy man, and we were opposites in that. I grew up in the hotel industry, so I think entertaining is just the answer to everything.
Right.
But, you know, he didn't grow up with that background. So initially he was, you know, kind of really resistant to the idea. But, yeah, within, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes, he was saying, I like it. Yeah. 6 weeks later, we did start, and we started with the administrative assistants. We did have them in groups of 100. And in general, like every month, we would have 3 parties and would have everybody, whether it was, well, we started with the administrative assistants, but then we went on and had the accountants, the truckers, the live haul people, the veterinarians, everybody. And it was a fabulous thing because it was a time when Frank could show the people he worked with how important they were. And he used to do something that, I just wonder if there's, you asked what people today could learn from the things that I'm talking about. I don't care how big or how small your company is, have them over for dinner once a year. And he used to wait on his employees. We had a great big long buffet table, and he'd stand behind it. And there might be 3 or 4 other people serving, but he would actually wait on his employees.
Wow.
If you want to communicate that you're important, wait on them. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of every evening, he did something that I think was just wonderful for employee engagement, because an engaged employee is the one who's going to go the extra mile and who's going to stick with you for life.
Right.
Well, he used to tell at the end of every evening, he'd report to people what was going on in the company, whether there was something terrible or something wonderful, or just you would hear from the big boss just what the challenges were and what the opportunities were and what the triumphs were. And then he'd answer questions. So, a trucker or anybody could ask a question that was important to him or her. And then at the end of the evening, he'd use different words, but he'd look out over 100 people or so, and he'd say, I know the company wouldn't be what it is today if it weren't for you. Thank you.
Wow. You know what that speaks to me on? I mean, literally hearing these 2 stories, it takes me back to modeled behavior, and it takes me back to your father. And your father had to have been raised by parents that in some way inspired him and motivated and planted seeds in him to, really treat other people with respect and kindness and to lift them up. Because here your father is modeling that same behavior to you and sharing that with you. And then you end up marrying Frank Perdue. And now you're bringing that forward into his life and planting those seeds into his life, and it's carrying over onto him. And now this environment, I have the chills as I'm talking about this, because the whole time you've been speaking, I could feel your belief about
Thank you. Oh, now you're 100% correct about that he was inspired by his parents, but not quite the way you'd expect.
Wow. Tell us about that.
All right, this is family lore, and I'm a big believer in, if you want your family business to last or you want your family to be high functioning, tell the stories.
Sure.
But here's the story that is just epic in my family. When my father was 26 years old, he's from Boston, and he meets this beautiful woman from West Virginia. He invites her to come home to, actually it's Cambridge near Boston. He invites my mother, they're not married yet, to come meet his future in-laws. And grandmother Berta, his mother, tells my mother, don't marry Ernest, he can never stick to a job, you're going to end up poor. Can you imagine?
Wow.
Well, father took that as a challenge. I mean, if you want a wake-up call, having your own mother tell you the love of your life, don't marry him because he can't stick to anything.
Right.
Well, so, father realized that he absolutely had to do something. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's beyond imagination, but it happened. Well, so father went to whatever was the equivalent of the Yellow Pages back then, and he found a career guidance counselor. The man's name was Johnson O'Connor, and father had great respect for this guy at the end. But here's what happened: he spent an entire day taking just batteries of tests with Johnson O'Connor. And at the end of it, Johnson O'Connor told him, Mr. Henderson, you're clearly a very bright guy, but you have the worst human relations skills I've ever come across.
Wow.
He said, Johnson O'Connor told my father, because you're smart, I could see you having a career as a scientist in a laboratory where you didn't have to interact with anybody. You could go find inventions or whatever. But since your communication skills are, since your human relations skills are so terrible, that's what I recommend for you.
Wow.
Well, Father took that as a challenge because, as he told me, the most important skill you need in life is getting along with people. Mm-hmm. And how are you ever going to get anywhere at all if you don't know how to get along with people? So he began taking courses in psychology. Mm-hmm. He began reading books. He told me, and my mother told me the same thing, that both of them would read Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Every 10 years, they'd reread it. Father even paid for people in his company to take the course. He took public speaking courses. He took salesmanship courses. And later on in life, he was so interested in what makes people tick, what motivates them, what makes people happy, what scares people. He was so interested in just the essence of what makes people tick that later on in life, he'd make friends with some of the country's most famous psychologists, like B.F. Skinner would be a weekend guest there at our house. And if you're in psychology, that's a big name. Or Eddie Bernays, who I think was the founder of modern advertising. He would just, between lectures, books, magazines, he made it a life quest to understand what makes people tick. And so somebody who was supposed to have a life in a laboratory, never interacting with anybody, became a star in the hospitality industry. And I think the fact that he didn't start out understanding people, the fact that he made it a lifetime quest, gave him a competitive advantage over all the people who might have been trying to get into the hotel business, because he had a deeper understanding of what motivates people because he thought so hard about it. And as an example, instead of that first day when he'd take possession of a hotel, he deeply understood that if people are terrified, that their livelihood is about to vanish, they're not going to hear a single word you say until you reassure them, I want every one of you to keep your job. Wow. So his greatest deficit became his greatest asset.
That's so beautiful. And I love so many things about that story, one of which is, it sounds to me like you're saying that people can do things that they might have been told in their life they could not do, and they've thought maybe for many years they couldn't do, just by taking the time to really investigate it.
Well, what if, I think my mother was kind of the opposite of my father. It was clearly opposites attract, because she was this beautiful, graceful Southern belle. And Father was this, I'm not sure how to put it politely, but I'll go with what what the guidance counselor said, basically that he sucked at human relations. But for Mother, it came naturally. For Father, he cultivated it. And, they both ended up in the same place. They were great in the hospitality industry. I'm very torn on something. If somebody were to ask my advice, I have a deficit. Should I try to overcome it, or should I try to work as hard as I can on what I'm already good at? And my instinct is to say, work at what you're already good at. But look where it took my father to work at what was his greatest deficit. So I don't even have an answer. I guess maybe both.
I think both. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, excellent. And it's so interesting that you talk about that too, because I'm really strong on intuition. I've learned to develop my intuition and to listen, to separate myself from the outer world, but to really listen to what that intuitive part of me is trying to show me. What about your father? How did that play a role in his life, and how did it play a role in building his empire of the Sheraton hotels?
Well, his training actually was as a scientist. He studied chemical engineering at MIT, which is probably why Johnson O'Connor said, you can have a life as a scientist. But he once told me something that he said, I hope that the stock market analysts, don't learn this, but he said that he was a huge believer in intuition. He told me that there were at least 6 times when Sheraton had, in growing this hotel chain from no hotels to 400, where there were decisions to be made where if he got them right, Sheraton would flourish. If he got them wrong, catastrophe. And, if a hotel company's in trouble, it isn't just that he's going to lose money, but he felt a huge responsibility to the people who worked with him. I mean, I would hate that kind of pressure where if you make a mistake, somebody's kid may not go to college, or somebody may not be able to pay their mortgage. I don't even understand how you can have shoulders broad enough to deal with that, but entrepreneurs and businessmen somehow do. But he told me at least 6 times in the history of Sheraton, he would be facing a crossroads where you make the right decision, wonderful. You make the wrong decision, catastrophe. And he'd go to bed with absolutely no idea what to do. Just a great big, I don't know, and everything's riding on this. And he told me he'd wake up in the morning and he'd feel, and I think we're talking metaphorically, but he'd feel as if he had been talking with his ancestors all night long. And he'd feel that they had given him the answer, and he'd wake up knowing what to do. And those 6 times, they all turned out right.
Wow.
So here's a man who was willing to listen to. I wish he were alive today and I could ask him, did you mean as if I was talking with my ancestors, or I was talking to my ancestors?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what she meant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But either way, it's a very intuitive approach to life.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it sounds like he really grew to trust that, because intuition is such an individual process, and as you tap into that allowing in yourself, the answers for all of us have always been there, and it sounds like he grew that, just like a muscle in our body, in his self, and that's why he was able to grow the Sheraton in the way that he did.
I've had something in my life in which everybody universally told me I couldn't do it. And that has to do with when I was 38 years old, I wanted a television show. But there was, I had the farm show at the CBS affiliate in Sacramento, but you don't have to be super duper. I don't want to say anything bad about farm broadcasters, but they don't have the audience of the mass audience that I was hoping for. And what was keeping me from a larger audience was I had a terrible lisp. And a lisp, by the way, you can hear it, but if it's bad enough, you can see it as well. And that was completely disqualifying for me to go the next step in television. And I knew that. So I went to a speech therapist and said, can you help me cure my lisp? And she said, nope. She said, and this was probably, let's see if I can guess the year. It might have been maybe 1980. I would guess that, in case any speech therapists are watching us, that I'm going to guess that today, and 40 years later, more or less, that they probably got the tools to do something about it. But back then, the speech therapist said, we cannot help an adult get over, by the time you're your age, can't be done. We just don't have the tools to do it. Sorry. Well, I went to another speech therapist, And I told her, I really, there's this job. I really want it. It's so important to me. Help. She said, nope, can't be done. I went to a third one. And this one, by the way, was like almost a 2-hour commute back and round trip. And so, I was going, I was scraping the bottom of the barrel as far as speech therapists in the area. And she told me the same thing the others two had. She said, can't be done. We don't have the tools. There's just no way. But if you like, I'll take your money and you can come in. And for 9 months, we couldn't make even the slightest dent in the problem because I couldn't hear the difference. And my tongue, if your tongue has never made an S the way it's supposed to, I'm going to guess that most people haven't thought what it takes to make an S, but you curl the tip of your tongue a little bit. And if it's absolutely never done that, I used to compare it in difficulty to if I held up a pencil and I put it against your ear and I said, wrap your earlobe around it and write with it. It felt that degree of complete total impossibility. But somewhere around 9 months, I began to hear the difference. And then, I'd actually put my tongue where it should be. And so after 9 months, we began to make a little bit of progress. And by the end of the year, and thousands of dollars and untold amounts of time, my lisp was gone and I got the job.
Wow, that's wonderful.
That is so amazing. And I just think, there's so many people right now that are in a position of thinking about, okay, maybe I'm going to change what I've been doing. Maybe I'm going to pursue something that I've always wanted to pursue, but, they've had uncertainty around it, or they felt like, what if I can't do it? And I think it's such a powerful thing when we can really kind of uncover our own power to accomplish something. And so how do you feel like in that situation, your intuition supported you in that?
I've wondered how I got the courage or the stick-to-itiveness to do it. I'm wondering what inner thing I called on that kept me at it. And I want to give you the most honest answer I can. And at the moment, I'm kind of searching my mind. I guess it goes back to, did you all have the little kids book, the little, it was a locomotive that said, I think I can, I think I can.
Yeah, yep. The little engine that could, yes.
Yep, the engine that could.
As best as I can describe. Oh, wait, I can do better. It comes from Henry Ford, who said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're absolutely right. And so I just felt, I am going to do this. And it sure felt good when it happened. And then there was another part to it. I really wanted to overcome a lisp because I knew, friends who I got to know well over the years would even tell me that when they'd first meet me, they thought I was stupid. Because if your lisp is bad enough, you kind of look stupid. And so I felt I have a handicap, and I really, really, really want to get over this. And yay that it happened, that I could. So I guess part of it is to say that I was highly motivated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So maybe if the motivation is strong enough, you stick with it.
And I think that's
what you envisioned yourself speaking without your lisp. I mean, did it seem that real to you before it happened?
Yeah, it's a funny thing, but I'm almost scared to duplicate how I was before because I'm so scared I'll get in the habit.
Well,
it's almost superstitious, but I'm scared to replicate how it was. Just take my word for it, please. It looked awful and sounded worse.
Well, I think it's like anything else. I mean, I know you're associated with Mark Victor Hansen, and
him. Oh, what a hero! Yes,
and you have co-authored a book with him, and obviously everybody knows that he was the chicken soup for the soul guy, the author 500,000 copies
Would you believe 500 million?
Is it 500 million? Oh my
Yeah,
God, I believe it. I believe it.
But billion, I mean, I can't even think numbers that big. 500 million. But he's in the Guinness Book of World Records for it.
Oh, I believe it. And so knowing that you're associated with someone that is so positive and teaches all of these universal principles, lives by them, has developed these habits, and now you've co-authored a book, How to Stay Up and Down, what is it? How to Stay Up and Down Times?
Yep.
And so, tell us about that. How did you get involved with Mark Victor Hansen? And then how did you two come to write a book together?
It started because my passion is to do something to combat human trafficking. Is that on your radar at all? Human trafficking?
Absolutely. I was involved with Michael Reagan. I used to work for a business development company in LA. And so every year they had a 60,000 square foot museum. They would hold all these events to bring awareness to people about human trafficking. So it was with Michael Reagan and them at these events.
Oh, my response to hearing you say that is, we are not worthy. We are not worthy.
No, but it was awesome. It brought a lot of awareness. And I think that more people need to know all about this.
Well, I intend to devote the years that remain to me to doing everything I can about that. Mm-hmm. But because of human trafficking, Mark Victor Hansen equally hates human trafficking. I mean, I think every decent person who knows anything about it just thinks it's the worst scourge that afflicts humanity. Mm-hmm. Well, so we sort of bonded over sharing the same concern. But then when COVID-19 started being on the radar, I knew about it maybe 3 weeks before it was well known here. And my reason for that is because I visited China once a year for 2 to 3 weeks every year, visiting a Chinese family. And because of that, I think I had like a distant early warning sign that something really terrible is happening in China, and I bet it's going to come here. And so before people were really talking about it, and we're talking like mid-January, I was telling Mark Victor Hansen about this, and I said, if this becomes a world pandemic, people are going to need a lot of help. Because a pandemic, well, we all know it happened, and the amount of stress that people undergo during a pandemic, whether personal health or the health of people you love, or are you going to keep your job? Is the world ever going to return? I mean, the number of stressors are just there's no way to overestimate it. So I suggest to Mark, you're one of the world's most inspirational people, and I have a background. I'm a health writer. I'm a science writer. For almost 40 years, I worked for Scripps Howard. My column went to 420 newspapers. So I have a background in health and science where I know things that would just be really useful to people. You can be inspirational, and your stepson knows an incredible amount about physical fitness. What if we all wrote a book? But it would be a very simple book. It would be 40 tips. Each tip would be 2 pages long, so that people wouldn't have to read 300 pages to get something. No, if you're worried about this, go to this chapter. If you're worried about that, go to that chapter. He accepted it, and in about 3 weeks, we had a book.
Wow.
And it's on Amazon, and I haven't seen the sales figures yet. Preston is on top of all of that, but I did get an email from somebody I've never heard of in Taiwan saying that she had bought 1 copy, and she liked it so much that she bought 200 for her friends. And now the reason she was writing me now is she wanted to know if Amazon would give her a special deal if she bought 1,000. So people are liking it. And, the feedback that I get is that, the world needed this, because you need, oh my gosh, this is the essence of what you're about. What Mark and I and Preston were working on was a way of raising people's spirits, because Boy, if your spirits are too low, help me finish my sentence. If your spirits are too low, it's just the world coming
hard
to
to see. Yeah, right.
Yeah, you want to, I mean, the whole bottom line is to recognize that we're all one, that there's no separation, and that we have the choice in any given moment to raise our vibrations to a greater, grander idea of ourselves. Yeah. And so that's what it's about. And it's about coming together in oneness and recognizing you're a part of me and I'm a part of you.
Yes.
Share that.
Well, that makes me think of one of the chapters. And it's a chapter about how to be happy.
Yes.
And I'll quickly tell the story of it.
Yeah, please.
There happened, just by coincidence, a few years ago, in the same week, I read a biography of Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of France around the 1800s. And I also read a biography of Mother Teresa. Napoleon Bonaparte, he had all the wealth, power, fame, women, territory. He had all the goodies, probably in greater proportions than had ever happened before or since. Mother Teresa, in contrast, she owned the 3 cotton saris that she wore and the sandals on her feet. She had a vow of poverty and a vow of humility. Who was happier? And we don't have to guess, because Napoleon, writing at the end of his days in exile, he says, in my whole life, I can't count 5 happy days. That's the person who had all the goodies that you think you want: money, power, fame, sex, territory, everything. He had it all. What about Mother Teresa? Her worldly possessions were 3 cotton saris and the sandals on her feet.
Right.
She describes her life as a feast of unending joy. I mean, can you imagine one person pursuing one approach to life, couldn't name 5 happy days? Mother Teresa, whose life was all about giving, describes her life as a feast of unending joy. And so, since this is one of the 40 tips, but one of those 40 tips is, if you're a giver, like Mother Teresa, everything that came her way really came because she was giving of herself.
Yes.
Everything that came Napoleon Bonaparte's way was because he was taking, grasping, ego-centered.
Yep.
The people were poorer because of him. And what was the payoff for him? Couldn't name 5 happy days.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of something that was said to me. I'm a survivor of some out-of-body experiences, and I had my very first one in 1997. And the exact thing that was said to me when I came back into my body is just what you said about Mother Teresa, that you must help the world to understand that they must give of themselves freely without expecting, and love is all there is. Now, I didn't understand that to the degree that I understand now, 23 years later. I've had to learn to embody that, to be that, and to give of that part of myself from the cup that's full, from the awareness that the cup is always full, and it's only me that's making the decision whether or not I have or I don't have. And it sounds like with Mother Teresa, she was fully embodied in the idea that it was a never-ending reciprocal flow of good and greater good.
Well, I once had, in my life, I've had 3 runner's highs. And by a runner high, I guess everybody has their own variety of it. But I'll describe one of them. And it's faintly relates to what you said of out-of-body experience. Mm-hmm. I was running harder and faster and longer than I ever had before. And suddenly I began looking around me, and the flowers that I was running by, they began to have this beautiful golden glow like the Holy Grail. And everything in the world just seemed like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And a voice spoke to me, and it said, "Would you like to know the purpose of life?" And well, yeah, I'd like to know the purpose of life. And the voice said, the purpose of life is to give and receive love.
Mm-hmm.
And then another time I had the same experience. And let's say I've given you the purpose, the meaning of life, to serve one another.
Mm. Yep.
I'm so grateful that you're sharing this with everyone, because I think when we do go through difficult times, it's easy to fall into that place where that's what we're focusing on. But when we start to look outside of ourselves and we start to look at how can I help others, then a byproduct of that is actually us lifting ourselves out of that place that we feel stuck in. And so, go ahead.
I'm eager to share something from Frank Perdue. Frank Perdue, I mean, he knew he was going to give lots of worldly possessions to those who came after him. But he also wrote an ethical will. And an ethical will is when you write down the values that you want your children and those who come later. And the one, there were 10, but the one that I just cherished, the outer limits, because it just has worked for my life so well. If you want to be happy, think what you can do for somebody else. If you want to be miserable, think what's owed to you. And over again, when I'm teetering on feeling down, and it's my religion that I need to feel up, but if I'm teetering on the edge of feeling down, I start thinking, what can I do for somebody else? And it just so flips a switch on whether I'm feeling up or down.
Right.
Absolutely.
And it's so funny too, because it brings me back to, all the different things that you've grown through in your life. And even when Pamela was reading your bio and she was mentioning about how you own a company, a farm in Ceres, and I was saying that I grew up in Modesto. But the cool thing about it is isn't it completely the opposite of what you've done before? It's wine grapes in California, and it's like investing in the land. So what was your mental attitude into getting into something so different than the background you've had previously?
Yeah, because my background was a Boston debutante.
Right.
But my father died fairly young. He was 70, and it was unexpected. And we're talking 1967. And today I think people are, kind of a lot more aware of, how to put it, of wills and things.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, at that point, I guess I was 28. And suddenly, this is a man who, we had the controlling share of 400 hotels, the whole Sheraton chain. And suddenly my siblings and I came into an inheritance. I'm just trying to wrestle with how to put this, but we had been brought up to be frugal and to serve. And Mother always used to say, put back in the bucket. And is it clear what that means? It means, so much has come your way, give back at least as much as has come your way. Mm-hmm. And we were taught to be frugal, and we were taught to be good stewards. And I thought with my inheritance, but my brothers and sisters did exactly the same thing. We didn't go spend it on yachts and fur coats and jewels and gambling. We all, in one way or another, invested in it. And I was living in California at the time. And so with this inheritance, I thought, I would love to invest in agricultural land and then use it for experiments at the Agricultural College at the University of California at Davis. But to do that, I don't think you could possibly be more right when you say this isn't something I grew up with.
No, exactly.
I'm a hotel heiress. What am I doing? What's a nice hotel heiress like me doing in a rice field?
Right.
But the answer is, I spent 4 years before I invested a penny. I spent 4 years studying agronomy, agricultural accounting, rural appraisal, course after course after course. And then I made it my business to meet a lot of farmers and a lot of ag extension people, and and I looked at probably close to 40 farms before I invested in one. And so by the time I got into it, I mean, I'm not an expert, but I wasn't a total beginner either. And it did well. And, and you might wonder how I got into television if what I was doing was rice growing. And
right.
Okay, here's what happened. There was legislation that would have put me out of business back in the 1980s. I think I'm talking actually maybe late 1970s. There was a big issue about agricultural burning, and rice growers at that point. We burned our rice because after the crop, because there was a virus called stem rot that if it got loose, you wouldn't get a crop the next year. Well, there was legislation that would have put me out of business, and there goes my nest egg. I mean, help. And so I decided to write an article that would tell our side of the story. I felt if people knew that we had taxed ourselves $1 million to get rid of the problem, and that the air conditions that had made it everybody worrying about agricultural burning, that it wasn't likely to occur again for another 640 years. And don't make legislation which would put us out of business and it would be sold to the developers who pollute far worse. Well, I wanted to tell the story, but I'd never taken an English course in college. I was government and economics. So I went to the library and I took out a book called How to Write Magazine Articles That Sell. And I followed it like paint by numbers. If it said do a lot of research, I did a lot of research. If it said write an outline, I wrote an outline. If it said topic sentences, I wrote topic sentences. And then, if you're writing an article, how do you get anybody to pay attention to it if you don't have any track record of writing articles? And that's a problem. Well, I wanted this article to be in the in-flight magazine of the local airline, which was PSA at the time. And I wanted it to be in the in-flight magazine that I knew served Sacramento because I wanted the legislators to see it. So I called up John Johns, who was the editor of the PSA in-flight magazine, and I told him, could you advise me? What should I do? And he began giving me all this advice about how I should craft the opening sentence that it would grab people's attention. And guess what? It became the cover story of the in-flight magazine. And it became required reading for the California state legislature. And because, I'm a lady rice grower, what am I doing getting involved in politics? Right. And that meant that I got invited to be on television to describe what I was up to. And at that point, I was actually, you would be surprised how shy I was. It was hard for me to use the telephone even. And to go from too shy to use the telephone to being on television, but it was something that I believed in. And, I'm defending it like a mother lioness. Mm-hmm. Defending my farm was like the lioness defending her cub. Right. And so, I knew this stuff because I'd written about it and lived it. And so when I had the chance to talk about it, amazingly to me, how about maybe one of the biggest shocks of my life, when the little red light, the tally light comes on saying that you're going out live, I suddenly felt like a different person. Mm-hmm. I felt as if the words were coming and I was having the time of my life sharing what I knew. And at the end of it, the station manager said, "You're a natural for TV. Would you like a show?" Yes. That's how I got into television.
Wow. Well, and I just, I'm thinking about all of the stories that you've told us this evening, and it's really remarkable. I mean, you've lived a little bit of a magical life. I mean, you've done so many different things. You've ventured out and tried all these things that were outside of your comfort zone that you probably never even saw yourself doing. Tell us, what along the way in your journey, what stands out as some of your most magical moments, and what do you really, what really lights you up now?
Okay, there was a time in which my life completely flipped. because up until like age 38, I hadn't done a whole lot with my life. I had invested in farmland and I loved it, and I never expected to do anything beyond that. But there was a moment where everything changed, and it was the following. There was a man who I employed. He was an amazing person, and to protect the guilty, I'm going to give him a fake name. Let's call him Peter Smith. Peter Smith had the most amazing background. He had an IQ of over 200. That's 20 points higher than Einstein. And he was a rice grower. And his story was that with this fantastic IQ, he was devoting his whole life to writing a book that would be giving back to humanity for this great gift that had been given him. He wanted to share all the wisdom and knowledge and just genius of the whole world in a book, and it was going to be called Life, an Owner's Manual. But the problem he was facing was, when he first conceived of this idea, he's 20 and he's too young and wet behind the ears. When he's 30, he's thinking, there's so much more to learn. And every decade he'd put it off. He'd keep, accumulating more and more articles and research and whatever. But by age 68, he still hadn't written his book. And suddenly, the worst thing that could possibly happen to him, he had developed heart disease, and they weren't sure that they could keep him alive long enough to go for quadruple bypass surgery. And, it was a death sentence. And anybody else who has a death sentence, it's, end of the world. But for him, it was even more end of the world, because his entire life he had been working towards this one goal, and now he wouldn't be able to do it. Well, there's something called the Pritikin Clinic, which I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's it's very, very good at helping people with diet, exercise, meditation, just, the whole ball of wax. They come at you in a healing way. He spent a month there at the Pritikin Clinic in California, and a miracle happened. He had lost 15 pounds. His heart revascularized. He actually lived till 90. So Pritikin Clinic accomplished a full miracle. And we're now coming to the point where my life just flipped. He came back, restored to health, able to walk 10 miles a day when before he couldn't walk across the room without crippling pain. So I'm telling him, Peter, this is so wonderful. I'm so happy for you. Write your book. And he said, yes, I'm just about to. Just a little bit more research and I'll be ready. Well, at exactly that moment, I knew he never would write the book. And he never did. And I knew him well enough to know why he wasn't going to write the book. Because he was afraid of failure. He was afraid if he wrote the book and it bombed, that his whole life would have been purposeless. Mm-hmm. But I looked at it differently from him. I looked at it that he had done the only thing that completely 100% guaranteed failure, and that was not to try. Mm-hmm. And I can remember almost the hour in which I decided I am going to make my life the opposite of Peter Smith. Mm-hmm. To me, failure will be not trying. If I don't reach the immediate goal, that's a success, even though it might look like a failure to somebody else. Maybe I flunked an audition or I've submitted something and it got turned down. For me, the act of trying is the success. I would redefine failure. Failure is when you didn't give it your all. Because even when it looks like failure to somebody else, along the way, if you've given it your all, you've probably learned things, met people, maybe attended conferences, networked. You're farther ahead just from the act of trying. Right. And so there was one year when I went from too shy to use the telephone to published author, television show, and actually newspaper articles. And it all began the moment when I redefined failure.
I love that you shared that, because I can relate on so many levels to that myself. I came from the industry of the pro bodybuilding and fitness industry. And so it was really all about perfection, trying to meet up to people's expectations. I have a near-death experience. I had to rebuild my life because people were laughing at me, vilifying me, and spitting on me because I had an experience that, you couldn't talk about. And then fast forward, I have a second heart attack delivering twins right before 40, and they come back and they tell me I'm going to die in 6 months without a heart transplant. And very much what you just described in this story, instead of connecting to the diagnosis of dis-ease, I went into my imagination and I began to imagine from the place that I was already healed. And so very much like you described, my life story over the last 23 years has brought me back to the now, has brought me back to the present. And as you've just described here so eloquently and beautifully, is that I had to try. I couldn't give up. And so the more that we hear that message that you just gave, our audience hears this message that you just spoke so beautifully. It's about trying in today. It's about being present and moving forward through the moments of today, trying and not giving up. And so we are so grateful that you have been on the show with us today and shared these beautiful stories, Mitzi. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm first of all, I'm thrilled that you invited me, and I live to share the stories. Because I have a theory of what the greatest gift is, and that is my theory is that it's inspiration. Because inspiration gives you direction and it gives you energy, and
I think it's such a blessing to so many people right now. I mean, there's been, like you were saying earlier in the show, there's been so much happen and so much that people have had to deal with. And when you're going through a lot of things like that, it can be so challenging to find the way up, to find the way out of that feeling of discouragement. And I think what you've shared today has been so helpful and so encouraging. So thank you very, very much for that.
I'd like to mention something about the book that Mark Victor Hansen.
Yes, please. We have it up on the screen by way of free samples.
Oh yeah, I want you to get the free samples. But it was a $20 book. Mark Victor Hansen and I decided, and Preston went along with it, that we would make it available at the lowest price Amazon would allow. It's a 100-page book, and it's $4.58, which is to the penny the least Amazon would allow us to charge for it.
Oh, wow.
Because, Amazon wants to make money. They'd love to sell lots of copies at $20, but we wrote it to be helpful.
Yeah. Well, share with our audience how they can reach you. We have your website on the screen, but please share with our audience verbally for our podcast as well.
Perfect. Go to Mitzi, and Mitzi is spelled Mitzi. So it's Mitzi at auntmitzi.com. So my website where this book is auntmitzi.com. And to get to me directly, write to Mitzi at auntmitzi.com. And I'd love to hear from you, and I'll answer any emails.
Wonderful. And I've been having your free samples scroll across the screen the entire time so that our audience members could go to your website at auntmitzi.com and then also go to the section that you have your free samples as well.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Great.
You bet. Pam, why don't you go ahead and share with our audience how they can reach us?
So you can find us on the web at thehighvibenation.com, also on Facebook at The High Vibe Nation, and of course, Instagram at The High Vibe Nation.
Wonderful. Well, it's been such an amazing time with you, Mitzi. We just have really enjoyed this conversation, and we hope you have a great rest of the week.
It's just been so uplifting being with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, such a joy. Awesome. Until next week, everybody, you have an amazing rest of the week. Bye-bye now.
Never.
From everybody here at the High Vibe Nation, we want to say thank you for choosing to raise your vibration. And of course, please like, share, and subscribe. If you need to find us on the web, check us out at www.thehighvibenation.com. thehighvibenation.com. Looking forward to seeing you on the next episode, and keep high vibing.